Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Shang, where we bring in leaders from different areas of expertise and they share their wealth of knowledge based on their experience. Today, we have a very interesting guest, Cory Warfield. Thank you so much for joining us, Cory. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you got going on right now.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's great to meet you. I'm somewhat anomalous in this world. I started a B2B SaaS company about a decade ago after spending almost 20 years in restaurants. And we use machine learning, a little deep machine learning. And I learned social media and growth hacking to scale that company, raise capital. Ultimately, I exited that company some years ago, but I've gone on to kind of keep my social media going and growing. I've been part of some media companies with millions of subscribers. I personally have 500,000 followers on my LinkedIn. The kind of day job, quote unquote, for me outside of my startups is I help other people figure out and grow like crazy on LinkedIn. Get leads. We've done hundreds of millions of inbound deal flow through LinkedIn as an engine, but I'm still a serial startup guy. So I have a company called VJ, building a community-driven tech platform for DJs. We think we're going to be able to help DJs take over the speakers in every public place in the world and read the rooms and generate data and use blockchain to help artists be fairly compensated. And there's a lot more to that, but that project just got accepted into the Story protocol. We're getting some pretty exciting traction. So I think VJ is one that people will be seeing and hearing a lot more about lately as well. I co-founded a Web3 launchpad a couple of years ago called Decarbon, where we're all about blockchain, but not at the expense of the environment. We have about 12 portfolio companies that we're growing there at Decarbon. But then I'm also working on a new model for AI. I've studied the language models, action models, world models, navigation models, nature models, you name it. And my thesis is when those all come together, we're getting fairly close to AGI. And so we're building a model trained on love. And so we're training it on, tens of millions of data points on what love isn't, what types of love there are, what makes love, why love is important. And we believe that that's going to become foundational as we kind of, keep speeding light speed towards, AGI, and then, the super intelligence that'll come out of that, and then be further propelled with quantum computing. So, I'm kind of all over the place. I recently launched a newsletter on LinkedIn about kind of ethics in AI and AI news. I call it Tech for Good, building and using AI. That grew 100,000 subscribers in its first week. So people are really digging that newsletter. And I'm sure there's a bunch more that I could say. I'm in the universal basic income space. I'm still an entrepreneur in residence at Founder Institute, working with cohorts from around the world, building anything from ideation stage all the way up to, Series A funding. And, a couple of the companies have gone on to do some pretty cool things. So I'm happy to be here. I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
No, not at all. I mean, it's I'm curious now to kind of talk about more of like your origination. You say you spent 20 years, in restaurants and hospitality, and um, I doubt that Cory, from 10 plus years ago, 15 years ago, would maybe be looking at you now and how fluently you're speaking around some of these technical terms. Um, what drew you into this world of entrepreneurship? And then obviously then there's a certain curiosity and obsessive nature that has to happen for you to then become knowledgeable in this space, right? In the technical space. Um, where I don't imagine you were dealing with a lot of these technical components in restaurant hospitality originally. So tell us a little bit about that. What was that previous like chapter of your life like? And then walk us through what was like really compelled you to start your business ultimately that serviced service restaurants.
Yeah, thanks. I think I need to back up a little more then. Even when I was like in elementary school and stuff, I was talking about things, ideas that were exactly what the iWatch became, and 3D printing food and space elevators and how cars could fly and magnetize themselves so that they wouldn't, get in as bad of car accidents. And so I've always had this entrepreneurial inventor's mind. And I've gone on to do things like front bands before as a lead singer, lead guitarist that took tours and booked bands from around the country and world that I loved. And that was in the '90s. And also in the '90s, when I dropped out of college, I did join a global company as a computer software tester, and I had to learn certain, very basic JavaScript and HTML and things of that nature. But back then in the '90s, and so I have, this kind of foundation of thinking outside the box, engineering, trying to find solutions for problems. But then I just got into restaurants because it was so comfortable and I was so good at it. And I can make six figures and live a life I wanted. I'm a foodie, I'm a sommelier, so I got to eat a lot of good food, drink a lot of good, fun stuff. And for years, I thought it was awesome that I was waiting on all of the celebrities and musicians and business entrepreneurs that I'd always, looked up to throughout my life. At a certain point, I just realized we weren't equal. I was just a servant in the castle, and we were all still humans, but they treated me for the most part very nice, but not like one of them. And for some reason in my late 30s, that just really got to me.
Mm,
And so I had this entrepreneurial bug, and I realized that restaurants were so screwy because half of your shifts, they say you're on call. So you don't know if you're working or not. You don't know if you're earning or not. You can't plan a life. Invariably, they make you work when you don't want to. And if you really want to work, they tell you that they don't need you. And so I said, wait, the data exists to solve for this problem, right? They know what the weather's going to be like tomorrow. They know how many people are going to come in off reservations and walking in off the street. They know what time certain events locally will let out. And so ultimately, we put together algorithms that took a look at all these various data sets and helped restaurants schedule more predictably. That turned into compliance things, as well. And that's what they were starting to work on more when I left the company.
got it. Got it. Interesting. So you made that jump to starting this business, right? So going from six figures, to then doing that entrepreneurial shift. I mean, it's a sacrifice, it's a risk. What was that like, right? I mean, because I think there's definitely like the financial component, the very practical component, right? Which is like you're not probably taking a salary in the very beginning. You have to build out a product, right? So what was that like? And then also, what was the learning curve technically? Because did you have a technical background? Did you know how to code? I know you mentioned that you did software testing, but you had basic knowledge. I mean, I feel like that's kind of like my shoes where I had basic HTML knowledge, but I'm by far not like a coder or developer. And I had to bring on a CTO, for the companies that I've worked on, that I've trusted and found, but like I needed that technical counterpart.
Yeah, well, I did too, big time back then. Although I think the paradigm has shifted, and I'll touch on that. But I did the most like amateur thing anyone could have ever done. And granted, this is probably 2015. So this was a little while ago. But when I tell you what I did, you'll laugh, even though it was 2015. I put out a Craigslist uh, post and a written listing, and I just put on Craigslist. Basically like I had this idea. Here's the entire idea. I don't know how to build it. If you know how to build it, let's talk about doing something together. By the way, I've got no money, right? And like two days later, nobody had responded to this listing on Craigslist, and this became my first kind of foray into growth hacking. Like, not a single response, and I'm reading it through. I'm like, I don't get it. This the idea is great. The opportunity is here. I'm showing them that I know this space enough to solve this big problem. And I realized that the name of the listing was pretty bad. Something like I have a startup idea and looking for someone to help me. And so I changed the name of the listing to make $1 million, join a startup. And although I don't believe that the guy that I ultimately selected made $1 million off of the company, I think he had an exit as well at some point. But so I changed it to say that. And next thing you know, I had so many, I think I had over 100 submissions, and I was still waiting tables full time. So I went through the first couple of them. The one that looked really good, I reached out. He was full stack. He said, yes, I can build this. We met and developed a rapport, and we ended up working together for a few years. He was with us through several rounds of funding, and he built our not only MVP, but he actually built our version one that had tens of thousands of users. So that all came from Craigslist. Now I've gone on, I've learned a bit of Python and JSON and some of these newer repositories and languages, but you don't need them anymore. Especially what was just released last week, where you're going to be able to have ChatGPT 4 Omni take over your computer screen, and what Google's been building with Gemini, with Genie rather, and now with Microsoft basically acquiring Cognition that does Devin, which is, for those that don't know, it's an AI that can code itself really well. Like, you just tell it what you want it to do, and it product manages itself, and it writes code, it tests code, it deploys code. It's remarkable. So, we went from this transition of needing to do what I did and what you did, and go find someone incredibly smart and technical. And, usually they're not the world's most social people. And, coders are a very unique type of personality. But then we saw a shift to like low code and bubble and no code, and a lot of that stuff was not very good. Some of it was decent, but now we're into this world where we don't need to code, because the code can code itself, and you can mock things up really quickly anymore. You can build passable MVPs really quickly using AI right now, especially if you know your way around GitHub and some of that stuff. It does help. But so yeah, in those years, I did what it took. But now, these years later, I've got some pretty smart techies that I build stuff with, and we're always looking for ways to growth hack that.
Yeah. Speaking about the word growth hack, right? Like, um, how did you like? What do you feel you realized this idea of what growth hacking is, right? Which is like, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like, it's not necessarily like shortcutting things, because it's this iteration cycle of like it's a I think it's more of like a philosophy or like a practice of just like failing, learning, iterating, right? Very, very fast. But it's not something that they teach. It's not something that you like, I mean, take a class. Maybe now, like now you can, but like 10 years ago, there's not real like classes on this. Like, I mean, I fell into it as well. And, coming from like entertainment and TV film production, where I focused on storytelling, and then realized that you're telling a story, and depending on who's like reviewing that material, you pitch the story differently. So you got really good at like figuring out how to do that, to get to the outcome desired. How did you like, what was that process like for you to figure that out? And then obviously I think, as you get in more deep into the technical world and then the startup world, like then it becomes second nature, because that's the culture of it, right? But like, but coming from a non-technical world and then realizing
I
that.
I got both lucky and unlucky, but we could call it fortuitous, net fortuitous. And I got with my first company into a pretty prestigious accelerator. And so it was on site 4 months. We all went to the middle of nowhere, and they invested some money in us. But the bigger value is the mentors. And so there are people that have built multi-billion-dollar companies, and right. So they'd spend a weekend with us, and we'd go hiking and camping and all these things. One of the ladies' names was Emily. I'll call her Emily H. And she'd been one of the early employees at one of, if not the biggest social media company in the world. And she took a massive exit, but I think she was their third employee. I think she was one of the first 10 people at this company, that everybody knows and uses. And what she did there, she went on to replicate that in an agency, where she ultimately sold that agency for some hundreds of millions of dollars. And she's credited as coming up with the term and the phrase growth hacking. And she's kind of cited as being one of the first growth hackers. And so I got to know her and spent some time with her, and it was really cool. But she had this one kind of guiding philosophy. And, we were all early stage tech companies in this accelerator. And I think others benefited from her, as did I, which was her concept that she called the illusion of velocity. And I
Hmm.
think that was my introduction to growth hacking. She said, even at this company, when they only had, like tens of thousands of active users or something, she was like, you had to think about, what does it look like for them when they log in? What does it look like for their friends when they tell them about it? So that they think this is this really big thing, right? When they go to our website, we want them to think it's this big thing. And it's funny, years later, you look at their old website and it's trash, but this was the mindset, is this illusion of velocity. And the other thing that she taught me that I really took to heart was this concept uh, of the K factor, which is just an arbitrary equation, but it's equated to the measure of virality. And what the K factor states is that for every one person that hears about it, that's K, how many people are they going to tell? Right?
Mm,
That's the variable. And so if for every person that hears about something, almost always they're not going to tell anybody, right? Or they might tell one out of 100 people that they see or meet. And so that's a very low K factor, right? 1% K factor. But if you get a K factor of 1, right, meaning everyone that hears about your thing is going to tell someone. Oh, that's massive, right? I mean, there's no way. And so I understood how you measure virality and what that means. So if I want my post to get 1 million views on LinkedIn, I need to think about it as the K factor. How is everyone that sees this going to tell someone about it? Well, find something that's shareable. Great. Now they share it. That's a way for them to tell people, right? Have them ask their opinion and let them share their perspective. That's great. Now they're going to bring people into the conversation. And right. So there are these certain ways to just leverage these concepts and these principles that, at least for me and the people in my world, has been like life-changing, game-changing, whatever you want to call it.
got it. Got it. Interesting. And I mean, obviously you could have gone through a lot of different routes too as a founder. Um, going deeper into the AI LLM side of things. I mean, like, and then ultimately, you talk about blockchain and Web3 and things like that, right? So, um, everybody kind of, I mean, I feel like founders tend to gravitate, you can choose different places to gravitate towards, but it seems like you gravitated more towards, these, to different like learning models, right? And what about that was interesting to you versus like, you know, learning another domain entirely, where because obviously your attention is limited and your curiosity is going to gravitate towards where your passion is or where the interests are, and then you only have a finite amount of time, but it seems like you spent a lot of time going down this rabbit hole versus like what sometimes other founders will go into. So what was it about it for you?
Well, we got in at my first company into the IBM Watson program. So I saw, years ago, some of the stuff that was being built. And it was exactly what I'd always envisioned and talked about and thought of. So it was super cool. Then I had an opportunity to learn a little bit about what Google DeepMind, or then DeepMind, was up to. And like, these are things that once you start to understand conceptually, you realize that reality isn't what we think it is or have been told that it is, and that the future is going to be incredibly different, and there will be paradigm shifts at orders of magnitude. So this AI thing was already a seed that had been planted in me. But like most people that aren't super technical and don't have senior executive roles at those top companies, I didn't have access to a whole lot until ChatGPT came out. And my God, as someone that's been in tech and machine learning for a bit, as soon as it came out, I figured out how to jailbreak almost anything and get it to do almost anything I wanted it to do. And once the different models started rolling out, I figured out how to get the models to prompt one each other, and go back and forth. And I've just had so much fun as an entrepreneur. All of a sudden I started several companies at once, and people said, Cory, how do you have time to just hop on the phone and meet people all day and go take vacations and, right, enjoy your life while you have multiple companies and you haven't raised money for any of them? And the answer is just AI, right? It's like all these things that used to take me hours can now take me seconds or minutes. All of these things I used to need to raise $500,000 for to hire 20 people, I can do with a couple pushes of a button. Like and even though it's not as good as it will be and is about to be, right now I can get some pretty good business models and some pretty good customer interviews and some pretty good pitch decks and some pretty good sales collateral, and everything. And you just tell the different models to act like your startup advisor and to have an IQ similar to Sam Altman, and that this is the problem that you want to solve and that they're going to help you do it. And my God, once they came out with Code Interpreter and some of these programs that can code, they're not phenomenal. But once you know how to spin up an instance and play with some of these codes and go through and at least see what might be problematic, or bring in someone much more junior than you used to have to go through some of this code, I was starting to be able to whip up technologies and just help clients with it. And that's not even what I do. I'm not a tech guy, although I am a tech guy. But these are like people I was coaching for for LinkedIn growth, and I was able to help build products and things using AI. And that was my aha moment. That was, I guess, a year and a half ago or something. But you're like, this is it. I understand, unless it takes us out societally, which is possible, but at least at this moment in time, AI is it. It's, the people that think it doesn't do much or say that it doesn't do, things very well. And I have to, argue and say that that's probably user error. That what I love about AI is that it's its own instruction manual. You just ask it how to use itself. But I think, so many people are either just daunted or scared by AI or have this visceral reaction to it that frankly I think is unhealthy, at least by and large. So yeah, I'm fully bought in. I've drunk the Kool-Aid. Yeah, I'll go back for seconds.
Got it. Um, I mean, obviously, I think that it's here to stay. I think there's different evolutions or cycles to it for sure. But I think also, yeah, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be here a lot. Like, it's going to be here a lot faster in terms of like how much and how much to scale we're going to be able to see what it can do, um, pretty quickly. And I think you're going to either be on two sides of the track. Either you're going to be bought into it and you're going to learn the crap out of it and you're going to understand what the capabilities are and then, figure out how to utilize it. Or you're going to be on the other end of it and you're just going to be consuming and feeding it knowledge without, you're going to be somewhat robotic in that sense of just feeding it things and then consuming things, without really understanding your existence, perhaps. I think, to that, just kind of like centered on that though, like I think I mean, at least here, I think we are having a conversation of what we know it can do. And I've spoken to a few like AI experts that, are working with like NVIDIA and Chat GPT and OpenAI, right? And obviously they're thinking like you, which is like they want to see $1 billion business that has like less than a handful of operators that's vertically integrated completely with AI, right? I think one of those things is obviously also like having a data infrastructure in place. And we're seeing like I've been talking to a lot of people who have seen like a lot of spend on the enterprise side go into building that data infrastructure. There's a company called Scale AI that just like raised, $1 billion at like a 7 billion valuation to build out those infrastructures to leverage it for the purpose of generative AI. That being said, how fast is it, do you think that we're going to see this like mass market adoption, or like, you know, maybe like mass market adoption isn't the right word, but it's going to have an impact on the mass market or the general population, whether they want it or not?
So I think that's the right question to ask, and I think that the short answer that might sound a little perplexing is I think that it just happened a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah,
right?
maybe.
So it's really easy to get kind of blinded by the fact that right now you've got MS Build for Microsoft, and last week you had Google I/O and you had ChatGPT come steal the thunder from before that. Um, but I think that what really happened, and I talk about this on my socials and on my newsletter, but I don't hear nearly enough people talking about this. When Meta released Meta AI into their engines, right? They get ChatGPT gets something like 100 million queries a day, and everyone queries at least 10 times. That's at the most 10 million people. Facebook gets 2 billion queries a day.
Hmm.
Right. So when people go on and now just search for anything on Facebook or Instagram and it's coming to WhatsApp and threads, but you're using AI and people just aren't using it very well yet. And I think what will happen over the course of the next months is people start to do more and more with it. People are going to start to realize, oh, wait, I've been using AI for months and didn't know it. I think people are going to get much more comfortable with it. It's diffusing. It does some really fun things already. It can generate, little animated GIFs. What Facebook or Meta is doing right now, that's either scary or smart, but they're about to let every one of their users generate their own avatar based on all the data that they've taught, Facebook about themselves over the many years. And so next thing you know, and it's probably not more than a few months away tops, anyone can just have basically a digital twin of themselves that's trained on themselves and can do things that are powered by other AIs on their behalf. And that's Meta AI. And at that point, ChatGPT and Gemini and all these are going to need to release what they have that's similar. the sleeping giant is still Microsoft. They just started Microsoft AI with a couple of the founding executives from Inflection AI that cost Microsoft $500 million. They were happy to spend. And so, right, like Microsoft just announced some pretty cool stuff yesterday. The Google and the OpenAI stuff from last week, I think, are not as relevant. You know, the voice stuff, the multimodality. I think the big thing there is that this is much quicker, cheaper, faster compute because it can do everything within one model instead of having to go model to model to model. But I do have it on relative authority that OpenAI was ready to release a lot more last week after Google went. You know, OpenAI kind of stole the thunder and then let Google show what they had, which turned out to just be the same thing basically that OpenAI had. But had Google shown more, OpenAI was, in my assessment, ready to show a lot more last week. And so it just shows us, you know, what's kind of right around the corner. There's some concerns that super alignment team from OpenAI was just, you know, just all basically walked out. And there's definitely concern that Sam Altman may be moving things a little too fast. And so I think he needs to play it a little bit safe on certain hands. And, you know, but some of the stuff I believe that they have right now is disruptive would be an understatement.
Mm. I mean, I think that's some really great insights that maybe the general lay population doesn't understand, because that is already there, that functionality, whether they realize it or not. And they might see those dots there and they just don't know exactly what it is, but it's happening. Last question here, because we're wrapping up on time, is just, we'd love to kind of get an understanding, or like not understanding, but again, talking to Cory today, and then Cory from 20 years ago, right? Like you know what that growth has been like personally, right? Is there anything that you could shed a light on in terms of like other people that have like this? You mentioned like elementary school, you had this inherent entrepreneurial curiosity, inventor mindset, right? I was like that too. I was that guy that was like on a couch with like the idea for Netflix before Netflix kind of thing, had a bunch of ideas, but I was like not a technical person. And so like for me, there had to have this epiphany moment of realizing, oh shit, yes, the matrix is real. And if you understand what code can do and you understand the technical component of it, then there is this way to automate and build things, right? Whereas I think a lot of the general population still isn't fully aware of like what the hell technology can do. Um, they use it, but almost like blindly using it and blindly trusting it. And I think like there's a big difference in learning about it and understanding and knowingly giving your data away, or like being involved in the exchange with technology. But tell me a little bit about that. Like I'm curious as to just like, do you have ever take a step back and be like, how the hell do I know all this stuff that I know now? Right? What was that learning process like? Because I'm sure it was very, very different. I'm sure you had a very great knowledge base about wines and the tannins and the whole nine, but now you're shifted that knowledge base into something that's very, very vastly different.
Yeah, I think I had an aha moment before I even went into entrepreneurship. But when smartphones were becoming pretty pervasive, someone asked me something about a player on a baseball team or an American football team, and and my response was honest, but it was turned out wrong answer. Right, what I told them, which was true, was that I didn't know, and my revelation was that when I heard myself say that out loud, I was like, that's not acceptable. You know what I mean? Like I literally have Google in my pocket. I can just ask it. And so I was like, you know what? Scratch that. Let me find out. And I Googled, and okay, this person was on this team from this year, whatever I wanted to know. And I think ever since that moment, I just won't take no for an answer. When I started my first company, I didn't know what to do, so I went on YouTube. Right? I got lucky. I found a guy named Tim Draper. He had a little reality TV show he'd been trying to get off on YouTube called Draper U, and I watched that, and then right, it's kind of like an early Real World meets Shark Tank, and I learned from that. What I realized from that is that I didn't know quite enough, but that I needed to, and so I went to the library, right, and I got the Lean Startup by Eric Ries, and I read it, and that started to make a lot more sense. And so then, like I mentioned, I went on Craigslist, right, because I didn't know what else to do, and right, there weren't as many resources maybe then as there are now, but it's what I did is I made sure that I made meaningful progress every day. And it's not like this anymore, but I think, Chris, you've experienced this like I have. At the beginning, I did work 100 hours a week. I did not sleep. I didn't, like, you're right. I didn't get paid for years. When I was out of money, I had to go back and be a brand ambassador, and I was on Fiverr helping people with little startup stuff right at the same time, because the bills don't stop. And even though we had a bit of working capital and I had some payroll, and it wasn't enough to pay me a CEO salary by any means. And so you just do whatever it takes. And now that you've got AI, I mean, it's more so just learning what you need to know. And I think the cliche is, we don't know what we don't know. But so the onus and the impetus of a young entrepreneur is figure out what you don't know that you need to know so that you can know it. Especially when we're all walking around with Google in our pocket. Like, there's anything that someone needs to know about entrepreneurship and starting and scaling a company is accessible with typing a few words in a box and reading what comes out on the other side, right? Or spending an hour with ChatGPT and saying, hey, I want to start a company, I have no clue what I'm doing, where do I start? And it will just tell you, right? So I think the only way to fail at this point is to not continue to try.
Yeah, that's great. On that note, thank you so much for taking the time. I think that's a great nugget to leave on.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks, Chris, for having me, and thanks everyone for taking the time to check this out as well.
Of course.